Hello, welcome to CubsPS Plus, Northside Numbers Game, a weekly podcast that dives headfirst into the analysis of hot topics driving Chicago Cubs baseball. I'm your host, Mike Waller, a lifelong Cub fan, full-time baseball stat nerd, and sometime youth baseball coach. CubsPS Plus is part of the Bleacher Bunch Productions on the Fans First Sports Network, an exciting and expanding group of shows including the Bleacher Bunch, the Sun Ranto Show, Cup of Cubby Blue, Baseball Rabbit Hole, and Bricks Behind the Ivy. The Bleacher Bunch feed is available wherever it is you get your podcasts, and CubsPS Plus is always available ad-free to Patreon supporters of either the Bleacher Bunch or CubsPS Plus. My Patreon feed will be going away in the coming month or so. In addition to the podcast feeds, you can also find me on Twitter or X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus. A spin on the baseball metric, OPS Plus. Love the pod or hate it, please drop a review wherever it is you get your podcasts. And if you've done that, thank you so very much. Maybe you can share an episode with a friend. It's January 22nd, and I have thoughts on Cubs Convention 2025, a milestone point in my journey, the Hall of Fame inductees, and on Tom Ricketts speaking out loud. Are you ready? I'm ready. Here. Well, today is that day. Welcome into episode 100. I'd never thought I would get 100 episodes in. I looked at doing what I would do for that opening little gimmick, and for episode 100, I could go with the Marcus Stroman episode of this podcast or the Jesus Tinoco. But I think what I'm going to do, it's January 22nd. Today would have been my old man's 77th birthday. I'm wearing his last Cubs hat that I took after he passed. And that'll be my dad's episode of this podcast. I really started getting serious about the podcast when I took a break from work after he and my mom had both passed within the span of about a year. And he's one of the reasons why I'm doing this. So this will be his episode of the podcast. And while we're on that sort of train of thought, I do want to shout out Bob Uecker here. Mr. Front Row, he was a legend. Easily my favorite Milwaukee Brewer. Also my favorite Cleveland Indian from his time as Harry Doyle. He left us that gift, but nobody brought joy to the game quite like Bob Uecker, and he'll be missed, man. He will really be missed. I did not catch a lot of his games up the last several years when I've had MLB at bat. There have been times where I flipped over to hear the Milwaukee feed. And he was a great one, and nobody loved the game more than Bob Uecker, so definitely pour one out for him tonight. Today I want to talk about, be a little bit sentimental about my own journey, but I want to talk about Cubs Convention. I want to talk about Tom Ricketts. I want to talk about the Hall of Fame. I want to talk about the Dodgers. I took my son to CubsCon this weekend. I saw a lot of you. I saw a lot of people who listen to the show. It was great to see you guys. I'm really thankful for the support you guys give the show. And it was very cool to go with my 13-year-old. I have 3 boys. 2 of them are very much into baseball. All of them like baseball on some level and appreciate the game. But it was the first time I'd taken one of my kids to Cubs Convention, and it was really exciting to see it through his eyes. I go for some of the networking in terms of the podcast, or I go to hear what players and coaches have to say, kind of start getting excited for the season. And he was doing what teenagers do. He was all in the moment. He wanted to meet players. He wanted to get autographs, and he filled up a ball. So in a little bit on this show, I'm going to bring him on. We'll talk about his experience. But it was a lot of fun seeing it through his eyes. One thing that really hit me at Cubs Convention, you get there, and I tend to be more glass half full than a lot of people, certainly out on social media. I think some of you have commented to me that's kind of why you like my show. I give sort of maybe the other voice instead of sort of the complaining or ranting about, how everything is terrible. Try to give a little bit more of I like to say realistic, maybe a little more optimistic, but this is not necessarily going to be a Sunshine and Rainbows episode. But we go through these things, and I just try to say what I see and explain why I see it the way I see it. You guys are welcome to agree or disagree, and that's great. But one thing that I think is pretty much universal is talking to people at Cubs Convention. You get into that room for opening ceremonies. They've got the music pumping, the lights are going, everybody's excited to be there. We've all just tried to keep up with Crawley as he sprints to the front to get seats. And we sit there and we see the players come out. We see the young players, and we see the current players, and we see the new additions like Kyle Tucker and Eli Morgan. And we see, the Hall of Famers come out and they present the Cubs Hall of Fame class for that year. And then the big stars come out, the Rhinos and the Fergies, and Billy Williams is still coming out. And it's such a feeling, and it's such a vibe. And then they get talking about the team and what's coming. And that first half an hour of Cubs Convention every single year. I don't care what I've complained about. Well, the Cubs still need in the bullpen. I mean, as of this point, as of Cubs convention last year, the Cubs hadn't signed Cody Bellinger yet. They had just picked up Shota, like literally that day. So they really hadn't done much, and there were still holes to fill and still things to do. There's still work to do with this team. But man, you just never feel like you're more back. Like, it is time to go. This team's going to be great, and we're going to win. And that's such an infectious feeling, and it I don't know, it's really, really energizing. And then as the weekend goes on, things happen. So let's kind of take this a bit at a time. My thoughts on Cubs convention. I mean, it was super packed. I love seeing people out there. I was able to make some really good connections. I was able to connect with Alex Cohen, who was so kind to come on my show last week. I met Miguel Esparza again. I talked to him a bunch last year. Hope to have him on the show at some point. Got to get that worked out. I met Kyle Stanley from the Setup Man podcast. I met a bunch of supporters who I know listen to my show, listen to the Sun Ranto show, and the Bleacher Bunch family of podcasts. I was hoping to meet Jeff Rogauskas from Bricks Behind the Ivy. I've been on his show. We're now kind of colleagues at the Bleacher Bunch. He unfortunately was under the weather and unable to come, but I saw Sarah Sanchez and Danny Rocket and Crawley and so many other people. I met Luke Little's parents, who were actually here in Charlotte. Luke went to a rival high school to the one my sons go to. It's such a great time. So many great fans. Some we never even exchanged names necessarily, but you sit in line with somebody for 3 hours and I don't know, become a pretty good friend. And it's just a great collection of people, and I was thrilled to have gone. And we'll get to my interview with my son here in a little bit, but it's very exciting. And one thing my son enjoyed is, and we talk about it here. I put a TikTok ad on it. The Cubs have some grab bags. You never know what you're going to get inside. And I was trying to decide what to do for episode 100. And this is going to wind up being kind of a grab bag episode of the show. I kind of had wanted to set something up and do something big, but at the same time, the Cubs haven't done a ton of big stuff lately. And I had a bunch of little stuff I wanted to talk about. So here we are. So CubsCon gets you excited. It also puts Jed Hoyer and Carter Hawkins and Tom Ricketts in front of microphones. And I'm not going to get too into the Jed stuff. He spoke last week, really kind of off cycle with when I had Alex Cohen on my podcast. So you've likely seen, Jed says what Jed says. He says the same stuff all the time. It's about trying to find the right guys for the right spots at the right prices and trying to balance the right risk. And that's what he does. And so we can complain, we can not complain, but that's who he is. That's who he's been. I actually find it fairly commendable that as he's heading into a potential lame duck season, he has not changed who he is. He is not suddenly, he's made some trades. He has given away some years of player control for for potentially 1 year of Kyle Tucker, et cetera, but he is not so far gutting the farm system to try to save his job. And that could be commendable. It could also be foolish. I guess we'll see how all this turns out. I do want to spend a couple minutes talking about Tom Ricketts. Tom. He's not a terrible owner. And that's probably the nicest thing I can say right now. I mean, he's the owner that got the Cubs a championship, so that's a feather in his cap for sure. He got Wrigley Field renovated, established as a historic landmark. And he did, regardless of his attempts to get other public funding and things like that almost every other owner in every single sport manages to get, he was not able to get that. And that didn't cause him to, move the team out to Arlington Heights or someplace where he could get a big plot of land and create, Cubs Disneyland. No, I mean, he renovated it himself. They took loans. They did all the things they have to do. As part of that, they also bought up a lot of properties around, so that it's kind of, Cubs Disneyland is right there at Wrigley Field, and that's really the best place to have it. He gets some credit for that, which really feeds into the bigger point. So he has talked in the past about wheelbarrows full of cash, and then he's talked about biblical losses, and he just really should not be allowed to ever speak in public again. Just evaluate him on what he does. And I swear, nobody has more talent. I mean, he is a 5-tool player for pissing off Cub fans. And this time was no exception. He talked about the Cubs breaking even and talk. The Dodgers are on this huge spending spree. I'll talk about them a little bit in a minute. They're on this big spending spree, which is fine. I mean, it's all within the rules. They are not doing anything illegal. They still have a 40-man roster. They're still going to have all the same injury list rules every other team does. They are going to have a 26-man active roster, just like everybody else does. So while I could argue good or bad, we'll get into that in a minute. Let's set that aside. But with the Dodgers spending so much and the Cubs kind of going, right? Like they spend, last year they went right about $3 million over the CBT. The year before they spent kind of right up to it. They talk about wanting to spend kind of right up to it, and they'll push over when it makes sense. And they say all this, and that's largely what they do. This year, the Cubs so far, now they've taken some swings and missed on some guys, especially a couple guys who have gone to LA now. They have made the Kyle Tucker trade. That's a very good one, bringing in a star. Then they trade Cody Bellinger for the salary dump, essentially. They got Cody Poteet back from Cody Bellinger, but the whole point was dropping the bulk of his money. And I still continue to believe that the Cubs are going to spend the way they typically spend. They're going to spend right up to the luxury tax threshold and the CBT. And if it makes sense mid-season, then they'll go past it. Although I do think this will be a reset year because I hope a lot of things. And I'm going to try to strip the hope out of this one because I want to look as objectively as possible at Tom Ricketts. So Tom said that the Cubs really can't spend at the Dodgers or Mets level. Well, let's take that piece first. I mean, of course they can, right? I mean, the Dodgers have the best media deal in all of baseball. They are a huge historic franchise. They're owned by the Guggenheim Group. They have it's an investment of investors funding their team, and they have the massive TV contract. They get great attendance every year. They have a great ballpark. They're really, really set up well. And the Mets have, good TV deals, good media. They're owned by Steve Cohen, who is, the big boys billionaire. Like, all of these ownership groups are billionaires at this point. But he's one that kind of, at least has made comments and has acted in the past like he kind of sees the Mets as almost like a vanity project, a toy for him to play with, something he just wants to be good. And so when you get an owner like that, Steinbrenner used to be that way. Marge Schott was that way at times. It was a very different era of baseball. Marge Schott was not really that way. But we see it like in other sports, like Mark Cuban, Jerry Jones, Dan Snyder forever in Washington. Like these are Ted Turner. Ted Turner's one in baseball that used to be this way too. The owner very much becomes part of the look and the lore of the team. But not all teams do that. And I'm not going to hold all ownership groups to that standard. Not every owner is Steve Cohen. The Cubs are owned by billionaires, but not on the Steve Cohen level. So when we go through this and we look, okay, maybe the Cubs can't spend like the Mets or the Dodgers or the Yankees. Okay. It's not like you have the Dodgers and then you have the Pirates and the A's and the Rays. There are whole tiers in the middle. So my real question for Jed would be, don't set up this, the scarecrow argument. The straw man argument. Good Lord, I'm losing my mind. Don't set up that straw man. Okay, there are fans that expect that. I think the bulk of fans don't expect that. The Cubs do not have to have the number one payroll in baseball every year. And at a time like this, when the Dodgers have spent on Shohei and the Mets have spent on Juan Soto, and they're looking at very specific windows of opportunity to win, they're going to blow it out. My question is, why not spending Philly? Why not spending why aren't the Cubs as aggressive on free agents as the Toronto Blue Jays or the Giants? Why aren't the Cubs, while the Cubs spend around what San Diego spends, San Diego spiked it up a couple of years ago, and San Diego is doing it in a way where they spent less than the Cubs did last year, but had a better team and had multiple star contracts on that team. So there are ways to do it. So it's not just the straw man of, oh, we can't spend like the best in the world. So let's get to the next part, the part that probably really pissed Cubs fans off the most. Talking about breaking even. Now, again, I'm going to try to be as objectively fair as I think I can be here. Baseball's a business. And while as much as I would want my team to be run by a Mark Cuban or a Steve Cohen or somebody who just wants to win more than they want to make money, I get the realities here. I also understand too that a team that wins is going to generate more revenue. So, although there are certainly tiers, So the Cubs probably do. Obviously, the books are not available to the fans. I saw a good tweet. Somebody had thrown the question up to ChatGPT and brought back all the things. I mean, there are a lot of things that go into Cubs operations. You have, first of all, obviously you have the players. So you have the payroll. And that's the part that people see. People see what the Cubs spend on payroll. They see the $239 point whatever million dollars the Cubs spent last year against the $237 million CBT. They see the Cubs sitting right around $198 million in player payroll against the CBT this year, which is like a $40 million drop from where they were last year. The offseason's not over, so I'm not going to call this a pullback season so far, but we'll see. They're going to have to do it. The Cubs probably do break. Now, the Cubs operations certainly include tickets, concessions, merchandise, any licensing of players and images and all that stuff from all the things that we buy. I've got this Cubs hoodie on today. I've got my dad's hat on that was, I don't know, it might be an old enough hat. I think he probably bought it off when the Trib owned the Cubs. But, that's certainly a big part of it. And then the marquee revenues, the advertising in the park, the big signage, so many things go into what the revenues are that come in. And then you look at the expenses, and obviously the team payroll, you've got the front office, you've got the scouting system, you've got all the travel, you've got all the employees for the Cubs, coaching staff, minor leagues. There are a lot of things that go into it. And the Cubs probably are right around breaking. I 100% take Tom at those words. However, some of this is all kind of choice. I don't know exactly what all the rules are for incorporation, but there could be a lot of things under the team that I think that have clearly been stripped out. All the real estate around the ballpark is its own company. The Cubs are not directly, I think the Cubs have the ability to tap into some of those other revenues in those years when maybe the Cubs want to go over, maybe they do operate at somewhat of a loss. But they also, there's the sports book. There's Hotel Gallagher Way as its own corporation. So there are all these things that have been carved out into chunks. And so when Tom says they're aiming to break even, one, that's just not what fans care about. If every team owner said, we want to make money, okay, duh, you're a business, you want to do that. And Tom's kind of setting himself up like, hey, look at this wonderful good thing I'm doing. I'm not even caring about profits. I'm okay to just break even on the team. It's just not something fans want to hear, especially not in the middle of a time when, the Cubs aren't finishing this job. Somehow only the Cubs could make that big splash trade, get Kyle Tucker, and then never fill in okay, and then what? They've made some starting pitcher additions in Matt Boyd and Colin Ray, but kind of the big signing since the Cubs traded Cody Bellinger has been Colin Ray. That's certainly not the same money. It's not the same impact. I still think they will spend that money, but they have to do it. Cubs have been in on some guys that they've missed on. And I think sometimes, Tom tries to set the expectation, but he just does it in such an out of touch way. My recommendation is what I go into every season with is I expect them, unless they're in the rebuild, which they're out of that phase right now, I expect them to be at their starting point is near the CBT threshold. So this year it's $241 million. They're going to want to leave themselves some runway to acquire players in season. So I would expect them to leave anywhere between $8 and $15 million, or maybe 8 and 20. So that takes them to like 233, like maybe $220 million to $233 million as a starting point spend right now. Yeah, that 239 the Cubs got into last year, that includes obviously some performance incentives that were hit, but it also includes bringing in Itzhak Paredes for Christopher Morel and some of those other players players they picked up along the way. And so that's still going to be the path this year, but we'll see. I mean, I kind of have defended Jed. Well, I do that too, but I've defended Tom a little bit over the years, and I don't know. He just doesn't do himself any favors, so I'm not going to do any more probably either. I need to see what this team is when the Cubs hit spring training or get to the point where the roster is what it is for the season. Then I'll make my evaluation, decide how happy or not I am with it, and evaluate the roster. But as of right now, I can't think the roster's done. I think they still have more work to do. So, what's he doing? So let's swing this back to the more exciting and fun stuff. So Sammy Sosa was back mentioned. It was great to see him and Derek Lee going into the Cubs Hall of Fame. One thing I really noticed, I was a Sammy fan. I talked about him a lot a couple episodes ago, so I'm not going to get way back into it, but I always had some up and down with Sammy. But when he's playing to the crowd, when he is in that moment, when he was up to bat in the big spot, when he was running out to the outfield between innings, especially like after 9-1-1, 9-11, or in the playoffs, there's a vibe there. There's an aura, and he just runs hot. And watching those old highlights when they had him up there, watching him run on stage, and he was sprinting around the stage, he came with the American flag, and you can look at all there's a certain ability of people, to see the cynicism side of it. Like, obviously he's playing to the crowd. He wants to be back in the good graces, and he misses those feelings. But we've missed those feelings too. And even as much as I've been down on Sammy at times over the years, watching him run out, it was 1998 all over. It was exciting. It was goosebumps, and it was that moment. And he just knows how to bring that moment. One thing about the Cubs that I probably haven't spent enough time thinking about is I've talked about Christopher Morel. Wilson Contreras had it. There have been some guys that have it. Steele has it at times. Shota has it. But there are a lot of, frankly, kind of boring players on this team, which is fine because baseball is a game of 162, long stretch. Don't get too high. Don't get too low. That's how I am. That's how I live most of my days. Oh, but having some of those vibes and seeing Sammy, that was just, all the vibes were back. And we'll get into some of the interactions with that, but it was cool. And Derek Lee is one that has not been back a ton. He talked about being really busy with his family, and great for him, because I know what it's like to be busy with family, and those years pass quickly. But he was a huge part of those, especially the 07-08 teams. That 2008 Cubs team, other than the World Series winner, might have been the best Cub team in my lifetime. Probably one of the best Cubs teams ever. It was disappointing that they went cold and got swept out in the playoffs by Dodgers. Yeah. But that was a good team. And you look back, you start to look at, just in terms of Cub legends, that stretch from 2003 to 2008, 2004 should have been a better year. I talk about that season too much. But in terms of like impact guys from the Cubs Hall of Fame, you had Sammy Sosa was on those teams, Kerry Wood, Derek Lee, and Ramos Ramirez, Moises Alou, and Ryan Dempster, and just a lot of guys. Carlos Zambrano could be, I don't know what his standing is with the team or the Hall of Fame, or where he's seated, but from where I sit looking at criteria, like, he's a guy that could definitely be in the Cubs Hall of Fame in the next several years. That was just a really good era of Cubs baseball. And Derek Lee was about as good as it gets. He was there all the time. That 2005 season, batting champion, Silver Slugger, he was just a dominant offensive force. He always played a good defensive first base. It was cool to see him back. Get to relive some of those old memories. But with that, let's take a short break here. Probably stick in the commercial, and then for those that aren't on Patreon. And then when we come back, I'll have my interview with my son. We just got back from Cubs convention, so on to help talk about it is my son Andrew. Andrew, what was your favorite thing about Cubs convention this weekend?
My favorite thing about Cubs convention was probably either bingo or just all the autographs I got to get.
Yeah, you and I had talked going in. Like, there are a lot of people there. There's several thousand people at Cubs convention. It was particularly busy this year, I think, probably because of Sammy Sosa for a large part, him and Kyle Tucker. And we talked about, there have to be choices that's not a thing where you can go and do everything. You can't get every player's autograph. You can't go to every session. So you and I talked it ahead of time. And as I started to present what the options were, you made a very clear choice. Like, what did you decide your priority was for the weekend?
My priority was to get as many autographs as I could and fill up the ball that I got.
And I think you definitely did that. You want to show the ball?
Yeah. This is my ball. Got a lot of autographs all over it.
Which ones are your favorites?
My favorites have to be the ones that I didn't actually wait in line to get. So I got
So tell me how that works.
Yeah, so most of the ones I did get in line to get their autograph, but some I just saw them like near the elevators or just walking around. And so I found this one is Jody Davis. I found him by the elevators.
Oh, very cool. One of my favorites.
This one is Sean Dunston. I found him in basically the same place.
Nice.
Yeah. I found, this one's a funny story. I was actually waiting in line for, I think, Glendon Rush. And I just went over there because he had such a short line. And right as I was about to go up there, out from backstage comes this guy who just jumps in front of the line. And turns out he was Kerry Wood.
Wow.
Yeah. And then my two luckiest ones, on my way out on Saturday, you had been saving seats for us at the compound, the live compound.
Yep.
And I was just about to go up there when I saw Sosa Sandberg giving autographs near like the shop area. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, right.
Because the lines for him the next day were just off the charts.
Yeah.
Actually, that same day, the line was already off the charts.
Yeah. And right here, that's his autograph, right below Jody Davis.
That's so cool.
And then
I think
at the compound, my dad got us really good seats, like on the edge of a row near the front. And Ian Happ was interviewing Sammy Sosa. He was the last person he interviewed. And I was lucky enough to be the last person that Sosa signed something for. So let me see if I can.
Yeah, I saw in the middle of the crowd, I could see you were sticking the ball up, and I kind of thought that he was grabbing your ball, but I really thought he was already basically past you. I thought you had missed it.
Yeah, me too. And then he came back for one more.
How lucky to get that last one.
Yeah, and here it is right there, black in between the two blues.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So what were the players like? Were they chatty? Did you get to talk to them very much?
Most of them that I had to wait in line for, most of them, they were like, "Hi, how was your day? Having fun?" Stuff like that. One guy that I got, Jack Neely, so I went up to him and I got him to sign my ball, but you were doing something else and I was bringing your CubsPS Plus hat around for people to sign as well. And so I gave that to Jack Neely and he looked at it and he looked confused. And I told him that was my dad's podcast and he thought that was so cool.
That's great.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll have to get him on the show at some point.
Maybe
So, were all the lines worth it? You spent a lot of time in line this week.
Yeah, all the lines were definitely worth it. It was a
We
lot of
did.
fun.
We did some of them together. I know we both did the last morning. We did Andre Dawson. We did Fergie Jenkins the first day.
Mm,
The one thing about Cubs Convention, I'll say for anybody who hasn't gone, is if you have people you're going with, there can be a lot of gain from kind of dividing and conquering. There were times where I was kind of in one line and Andrew would get to run around. And then there were other times where I would have to go either talk to somebody or go sync up for like whatever activity we were going to do next. And Andrew would hold the spot in line. Like you just can't be in all the places at the same time.
mm. Really helped to have a group of people there.
What other highlights for you this weekend?
Well, of course, there was Cubs Bingo, which is awesome. It was just
Yeah,
a
that's
lot
always
of
fun.
yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it got exciting when Sandberg came up and started auctioning off some signed shirts.
Yep.
That got really high. Oh, grab bags. On the first
Yes.
day, we
So
waited.
for those, I was going to say, for those who don't know, Cubs charities have grab bags you can get for a donation. You get a bag of things. Sometimes it's giveaways. They also had this year. They had extra giveaway items in a bag, or you could get 3 bobblehead set. So I did the bobbleheads. Andrew did the grab bag. And go ahead.
So we got the grab bags, kind of mystery bags, and I opened mine. It was a lot of fun. I got this hat, also a blue one, very much like it. And I got this shirt, which I think is really cool.
That's a very cool shirt.
Mm. I also got a Fergie Jenkins like statue bobblehead.
Oh yeah, that was a good one.
And I got, that was mostly the main things that I got.
So one thing I got that, well, we both got. So they also had mystery baseballs for signing, and Andrew got, as I put it, the wildest set. So tell them why it's a wild pair.
It was a wild pair because the 2 people I got were Dylan Maples and who was the other one?
Tyler Chatwood.
Yeah, Dylan Maples and Tyler Chatwood. And as I've been told, they had good stuff, but they couldn't throw it in the strike zone.
Yep. Chatwood especially is a little before your time. You might have seen a little bit of Dylan Maples, but the Cubs moved on from him 2 or 3 seasons ago. So, well, now's the time. I also got 2 balls, and I was going to save them to unbox on my 100th show. So, should we do it right now?
Yeah.
So here's the first one. Open it up. We did learn that the name is in the box, so I'm going to try not to look there and just figure it out by the autograph first.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time looking up signatures.
Oh, that same free agent class where the Cubs got Tyler Chatwood, I got Brandon Morrow. He was
Nice.
really, really good for a half season. Then his body broke down and he never pitched again.
Oh,
A lot of money, and that team did not have enough in the end. And my next one is that I will never tell. Oh, I got a Mike Talkman, number 40.
oh, nice.
Palatine Pounder. Yes.
Nice.
Mike Talkman. That's a good one. I'm happy with that one. Very cool. So what advice would you give other kids, Andrew, that maybe next year get to go to their first Cubs convention?
Probably, of course, don't worry about waiting in lines because that's pretty much the whole thing. And also, give yourself a little bit of free time because you never know who you might see just walking around in the hallway.
Yeah, I find that even when I'm moving around down there, I'm usually meeting somebody somewhere, trying to get to a particular event. And sometimes I would imagine I probably walked past people because I'm just not paying enough attention. But you do get to see people around. You got to meet, in addition to the players that you ran into, you got to meet Miguel Esparza, the Spanish language announcer for the Cubs. You got to meet Alex Cohen, the Iowa Cubs announcer. We got to meet Luke Little's parents on Friday morning.
Yeah, that was cool.
We met some other podcasters, so a lot of people around, and definitely some people you'll notice. I never got a chance to say hi to them, but I saw Jim Deshaies, JD, a couple times. Of course, Boog and the players are all floating around everywhere. So, yeah, be on the lookout, be ready, and just everybody's so friendly there. I mean, nobody gave you any. I wasn't actually with you when you ran into any of those players, but they gave you no trouble walking up and asking for an autograph, did they?
No, the only trouble was crowds.
Yes. Fight your way through, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to get harder for you every year because they're always going to do the littler ones first. So you're kind of on the edge of a kid still. In another year or two, you'll be more of the big annoying teenager, and they'll focus on the little ones.
Yeah, I'm glad I got some good ones this year.
So if you had, I don't know what our plans will be next year, but if we get to go back again next year, is there anything you would do differently?
I don't think so. Maybe
Okay.
Maybe on the last day, I would ask for more than just a banana, because I was waiting in line, and Dad went to go get some food, and it was not enough.
We did start early. We're trying to get Andre Dawson get early enough in line that we had time to do that and still go get our bags and get to the airport. So, yeah, I mean, it is, some of those lines have to start crazy early. There were Kyle Tucker, I know, on Saturday. I know that line started at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and he was signing at 10, if I remember right. And then Sandberg was signing it, I think, at 1, and his line started before 7. Some of those big ones, you just got to get down there. And if you're going to commit, you got to commit and be very friendly with the people in line around you so that you guys can tag out if somebody has to go get something to eat or go to the restroom or anything like that. But no, it was a good time. And I had a good time hanging out with you. Well, thanks for coming on. You are making your first podcast appearance on episode 100, so that's very cool.
Nice.
And so thanks for coming on, and I will probably talk to you in a few minutes.
Thank you.
Bye. And now we're back. Thanks to Andrew for coming on the show and talking about his weekend with the Cubs. It was very exciting. And so now I want to talk about, it was good to see Ryne Sandberg there. It was good to see all those Cub greats come back. Let's lead into the Hall of Fame discussion a little bit. So this is not so much Cubs related, but the inductees this year were Ichiro, who was just an absolute no-brainer. CC Sabathia, another pretty much no-brainer, first ballot guy, and Billy Wagner. And so Billy Wagner was getting close to the end of his time on the ballot. Closers never, well, relief pitchers in general, there's still a long-standing hold against them. They were always seen as less than pitchers. I think that's really started to change ever since the Goose Gossage, Bruce Sutter, Lee Smith, and those guys kind of era. Yeah, but Billy Wagner was one of those, I mean, top of his game. He was as unhittable as anybody. Had a lot of big seasons with the Astros. And I'm happy to see him get in. CC Sabathia totally deserves it. What I want to talk about for a second is Ichiro Suzuki. So we're at a time now where there are all these stars coming over from Japan. Still primarily a lot of pitchers, but the Cubs have had Kosuke Fukudome. They have Seiya Suzuki now. There are infielders and outfielders, and every position has had a chance to come over now from Japan. And Ichiro was really the one that broke down the doors on the position player side. He came over. There was talk that we knew that the top of the market Japanese pitchers could pitch well over here. We'd had many of those guys, Hideo Nomo, so many. And we continue to see it today. But there hadn't really been position players come over and be successful. And there were definitely questions about whether Ichiro was going to be able to hit the way he had hit in Japan over here. He got those questions over with fast. I mean, his numbers were just off the charts, just 300 plus season after 300 plus season. I heard a crazy stat yesterday, if I have it still correct in my head, that in his, I forget how many, it was within his first 10 at bats, he got his career batting average up over 300, and it never went under that again the rest of his career. So I mean, that's kind of up there for me with like the famous stat that Clayton Kershaw, every single year of his career until I think it was 21 or 22, had lowered his career ERA every single season because he had kind of a rough start that first year and then was just so amazing. But no, Ichiro had character. He had that panache, that style. He had a little bit of pop. He had a ton of speed. Great defense. 10 Gold Gloves. It's off the charts. So totally deserving. And yet somehow baseball writers are going to do what baseball writers do. This whole first ballot, this whole unanimous thing, on the one hand, it doesn't really matter. You're a Hall of Famer or you're not. But some of them make such a big deal, and it gets so sanctimonious over being first ballot or being unanimous. And I've heard some of them speak over the years. I've heard ridiculous things like, well, if Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb can't be unanimous, then nobody's going to be unanimous, which is just stupid because Ty Cobb and Babe Ruth went in on the very first ballot in 1939. And that was at a point where they were trying to create the starter set, and they were voting over the course of like 50 years of baseball history up to that point. So it's just not apples to apples. I mean, there's no scenario in which the Hall of Fame already exists. Babe Ruth retires at any point since then in baseball history, and you get to vote for 10 guys and somebody leaves Babe Ruth out. Well, all right. There's always a writer that doesn't like a player for something. But Ichiro was so well liked. He was so good. There's literally no argument against him being a Hall of Fame player. I know there are a few every once in a while that explain, I didn't vote for that big star because I knew he was going to get in, and I wanted to throw some votes at somebody else to help keep them on the ballot. And I understand that, and I can connect to it to a certain point. But it just looks dumb when Ichiro Suzuki comes one vote short of being unanimous. It just reeks of some Yankee writer somewhere just making sure that Mariano Rivera stays the only unanimous player. I mean, the same thing happened to Derek Jeter. Ken Griffey Jr. wasn't unanimous. On and on and on. This happens all the time, but it's ridiculous when that becomes some of the attention, and it's just ridiculous when it just happens. I mean, go vote for your guys and get out. The other notable one I'll mention is this was the year that Ben Zobrist went on the ballot. I don't think Ben Zobrist is a Hall of Famer. He was never going to get in. I was a little bit surprised that nobody threw him a vote. Guys get votes just to try to see if they stay on the ballot. Some guys get a vote or two because I really like that guy. But the reason I think if I had a vote, why I might have thrown, Ben Zobrist in my 10th spot or my 9th spot, is that he really took that super utility player to a next level across multiple teams. And also, when you look at him, he definitely was a winner. We know that from watching him in Chicago. But he was a major part of 3 teams going to the World Series. And it's not like he was Dodgers or Giants or Cardinals. He went to the World Series with the Tampa Bay Rays, the Kansas City Royals, and the Chicago Cubs. So not exactly, the ring chasing kind of thing we see so often in sports today. Like, he was a major part of some franchises that frankly don't get there very often. And got there, and he won it with the Cubs and he won it with the Royals. So I don't know. Shout out to Zobrist. Was never going to be a Hall of Fame, but he did not get a single vote, so he will be off the ballot and no longer eligible from this point forward. So the Cubs also rolled out some new uniforms last week. So when teams get City Connect uniforms, they're pretty much in play for 3 seasons, then they're going to be retired. So the Cubs City Connects are now retired, and the Cubs brought out a new alternate uniform. I'm sure you've seen it by this point. It's the powder blue. It's got the funky C with the star in the corner of it. Got a guitar pick that says Chicago on the side, kind of playing off the blues scene in Chicago. I like them. I think it's a really clean look. I've always been a fan of the powder blues. I'm happy to see the Cubs bring that back. I think it's going to be a good look. I think there were some good accompanying pieces. I don't like the jerseys so much, but there's a sweatshirt of the Cub Bear playing a guitar that is just absolute fire. So I like that look. We'll see. The Cubs are going to debut them on April 4th, and then they're going to play in them like they did with the City Connects on Friday 120s, home Fridays during the summer. So look to see those uniforms. And then hit on Cubs convention a little bit here, and that's always a good time. And it's great to go and see people. It's busy. You have to make a bunch of choices. It was nice to connect with, Miguel and Alex that I've talked to before and all that. But it also gets you around Cubs fans. Get to talk about the team and what they've done and what they like and what they don't like. And it's a reminder that baseball is almost here. The Cubs are going to Cubs and Dodgers open spring training early because they play early in Japan. So pitchers and catchers report now on Super Bowl Sunday. So we can really, right after football's over, baseball season. But the Cubs still have work to do. And so the Cubs still have money to spend. And this is where I'll start with the Dodgers, but then get into where I want the Cubs to go from here. So Dodgers obviously are deferring money on a level nobody's seen before. I hear complaints about it. That was one thing I heard a lot at the convention from fans, was talking about the deferring money. Excuse me, talking about the way the Dodgers spend. And it's frustrating when your team is not doing that. I talked a little bit about Tom and where he's going. It's not so much that I expect the Cubs to have the biggest payroll in the league. It'd be nice if they did. The Cubs are a big market team. They're the third biggest media market. I don't know what everybody's TV deals are. They're probably fourth. I'm sure they're behind the Yankees, Mets, and the Dodgers because New York is so big. And the Cubs compete. I hear a lot of talk about they're cheap. And they're cheap is an easy word to throw around because it doesn't have a definition. The Cubs are cheap compared to the Dodgers. They're cheap compared to the Yankees. They're cheap compared to some of those other teams. But the Cubs, even the last 2 years, when it felt like the Cubs could have done so much more, they've maintained a top 10 payroll, which is top third in the game. If you look over time, I've talked about it on past episodes, you look at the teams that consistently make the playoffs, look at the teams that make runs in the playoffs, teams that get to the World Series. There are exceptions, but for the most part, you have to spend into that top 10 money to put yourself in a position to be able to do those things. And baseball definitely right now has at least a perception problem that there's no ability to compete with those top teams. And this year, the two highest payrolls made the World Series. This year, the Dodgers are continuing to add and add and add. And I will say, though, as they add, they still have the same roster limits everybody else does. So it's not like Major League Baseball is just saying, it's okay, LA. You guys can go spend $500 million on team payroll this year. We'll let you have 50 spots and carry 35 guys on your active roster. No. So they're having to let guys go. They had to let a guy who was a top catcher prospect, as recently as a couple of years ago, go. They're going to have to get creative now as they add some of these guys. They've picked up Tanner Scott, Kirby Yates, both of whom were Cubs targets. And when you add that caliber player to the team, you have to look at other things. You have to let other guys go. And I've not seen the corresponding move for Tanner Scott yet. Probably has not been. I don't think it's been announced yet. But they're going to have to clear somebody off the 40-man. They still have some younger relievers that haven't done much that probably would be your DFA types, make a small trade, clear the roster spot. But they're also in a position now where the way they've added to that team, Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts, Shohei Ohtani, those guys are under contract for a while. You look at the starting rotation. Blake Snell just got a fresh new deal. Ohtani's going to be here for a while. He's got 9 years left on his deal. Yamamoto just signed the huge deal last year. He's got a long way to go in LA. They just got Roki Sasaki, who's going to be not a free agent for 6 seasons. They extended Tyler Glasnow after they traded for him last year. So that's a starting 5 right there. I know they have the injuries and they're going to have their depth. But that's a starting rotation of 5 that, hey, is really, really freaking good. But it's also 5 guys that are going to be here for a long time. And so when they're looking at Dustin May and Bobby Miller and River Ryan and some of those other guys coming up, they have some good young pitching talent coming up that they're not really going to have spots for. And when I look at their roster right now, I took a look after the Tanner Scott sign. Tanner Scott would make, depending on who they move off to bring him on, they would have 23 guys on their 40-man roster that don't have minor league options. And 11 of those are pitchers. So they're really kind of locking themselves in to not have the space to be able to move guys up and down, which is going to make it more difficult to keep and use the bottom part of that, that roster and the bottom end of that pitching staff. So the Dodgers start to become an interesting place to look for potential trades. They have good young talent you can trade for. They're probably just like when the Cubs traded for Michael Busch last year. He was a guy who was blocked at 3 positions. He was, at the time of the trade, he was behind Freddie Freeman at first, Mookie Betts at second, and Max Muncy at third base. And in return, the Dodgers got to what looked like really good prospects in Jackson Ferris and Zaire Hope. And Zaire Hope has absolutely exploded over the last year, which was always a possibility. He's also still only 19 and is still away from the major leagues. But make trades for those guys who are off the 40-man and several years away. So that's probably if the Dodgers are going to make trades at this point for some of that young pitching depth, that's probably the direction they're going to go. Now, some of this will come down to how healthy they think they are as they head into the season. So while they're at 40 on the roster right now, they do have several guys. Gavin Stone's another one who I could have mentioned earlier, but Gavin Stone's already been announced he's going to miss the 2025 season. So as soon as they hit spring training and they hit that date where the 60-day injured list becomes a viable thing, several of those guys are going to go on it. I think the Dodgers are going to sign Clayton Kershaw, but he's going to immediately go to the 60-day IL. So they're going to have these spots and they're going to have to churn and clean it up. But there are still limits. So when I look at whether it's good or bad for baseball, I could argue both ways. On the whole, I think it just is what it is. I mean, we have the system that we have, and we have a system that has no salary cap. We have a system that has no salary floor. We have a system that allows deferrals. We have a collective bargaining agreement where deferrals were explicitly bargained. I've heard from both sides that at times over the years, both players and owners have wanted deferrals in there. So it's not the Dodgers are breaking no rules. They're, as far as I'm aware, they're paying their luxury tax. They are doing all the things they can do. And there's a perception out there that baseball has a parity problem, that the Yankees and the Dodgers are just going to buy super teams and go to the World Series every year. But so far, we haven't seen it. We haven't had a team repeat as World Series champions in 25 years. Despite having playoff teams almost every single year for the last 20 years, the Dodgers have 2 rings. The Astros won twice. I mean, the Red Sox have won a few. The Cardinals have won a couple. The Giants have won 3, but not consecutively. And those teams are not dominating year over year over year. So I don't know that I went through it in an episode earlier this season. I'll probably do it again next year at some point. But baseball has more objective parity than any of the other major sports. It is no worse, and it's typically a little bit better than the other sport. Whether you're looking at distribution of champions, whether you're looking at distribution playoff appearances, whether you're looking at how frequently teams make the playoffs, baseball just has more built-in parity than everybody else. Which is a little bit counterintuitive, because it would seem, in the NBA, if you get Michael Jordan, if you have Steph Curry, if you have LeBron James, that's going to go a long way for you. And baseball, 1 star doesn't make quite that much impact, but that's still the result of what we've seen over and over and over again over the years. And that's fine. So I don't actually think the Dodgers are a problem. At this point, they should do what they do. They continue to bring in more guys, then they're going to have more guys to let go and make available through trades or through waivers or whatever after that. What I think is really, really interesting, though, is you have a number of teams that, and part of the reason why the Dodgers are able to go get all these players is because so many other teams aren't. You have, on one extreme, you have, the A's and the Pirates, who just notoriously don't spend. Now, the A's have actually spent a little more this year, because if they don't spend enough, they're not going to get those revenue dollars. Bob Nutting is cheap. You want to talk about cheap? Look at Bob Nutting in Pittsburgh. He has the luxury of probably the best young pitching staff in the game. He's got Mitch Keller, Jared Jones, and Paul Skeens all locked up under team control with years of team control. So they would need to have to spend top 10 money. Just go spend more, get some bats to go with those guys, and become a really dangerous team, but he just doesn't do it. So when you have all these teams that don't step up and sign those guys, then you let the Dodgers become a very popular attraction. Who wouldn't want to play with Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman and Shohei Ohtani? They become a very good team. So you get a guy like Kirby Yates at the end of his career. The Cubs were looking at him. I don't know how serious those discussions ever got. But Kirby Yates is 37 and would probably love to go to LA and get a ring. So you become an attractive destination. You're already good weather. You're already an ownership group that shows they'll spend. You're playing with other fun players. Track record of success. So it's really on the other teams to go do it. And there are certain teams, I get some of the realities. I mean, even though they're all owned by billionaires, there are definite huge disparities in terms of media markets and media revenues and all that kind of thing. The Tampa Bay Rays simply, as much as Tom set up the straw man that the Cubs can't play in the Dodgers and Mets space, a team like the Rays really can't. The Brewers can't. So many of these teams can't, but they could still do more. They could still be a little more aggressive. And then you get to the teams that do kind of, as much as I say the Cubs spend enough to win, because what I do on this podcast is I try to evaluate the team I see before me, what I think they could do better, what I think they're doing well. And there's just a reality that no matter what I say on the show, it's not going to change what they're going to spend. I say it all the time. The Cubs should spend more, but also they spend enough to win. And the Cubs are in that bucket with Baltimore. They have a new owner who's talked about spending, and still, I don't always know what the split is between blame for Tom and blame for Jed, because I don't know where the budget is, and I don't know how much of it is Jed being I talk about the Cubs spending a little bit more than the Padres did last year, but not having star level contracts. There are commitments that I don't think are Tom driven. I think that are commitments Jed doesn't want to make in terms of longevity, in terms of big dollars to one guy that might tie his hands at some big point in the future. And that's kind of what I worry about with Kyle Tucker, although I just need to see on Kyle. The Cubs continue to say year over year over year that for the right guy, they would make that big offer. At some point, they have the power to change that narrative whenever they want to by doing it. So we'll see. But the Cubs and the Orioles with Mike Elias, there are a bunch of these teams that don't go out and commit those dollars to those bigger contracts, to that star power. And that becomes, it allows for the Dodgers to just kind of, you come here and you come here. And the Mets spent a ton of money a couple seasons ago. What I am interested in is the Cubs looking past 2026. So the Cubs have 2 more years left of Ian Happ, 2 more years of Nico Horner, 2 more years of Jameson Taillon, 2 more years of Seiya Suzuki. They've got 1 more year at this point of Kyle Tucker. So, and they have a number of other guys who have a couple of ARB years left, but the Cubs don't have very much money committed past 2026. And 2026 is when the current collective bargaining agreement expires. And it's going to be very interesting to see with what the Dodgers are doing and what some of the other teams are doing or not doing, really see how that plays out. Because I really think we could be walking into a scenario where, it's always owner versus player. Will there be a work stoppage? Will they work things out? I think there might be an owner fight first. I think some of those ownership tiers may start to battle over revenue sharing, over how much teams can spend, competitive balance. But we'll see what happens. And it may just work itself out like it always does. If you're trying to make the argument that the Dodgers are building a super team and it's not fair and it's hurting the game as a whole, that argument is going to hold a lot more weight if the Dodgers go out, dominate the next 2 seasons, win 2 more championships, and they're, on a 3-peat at the end of the CBA deal, or that the teams that go deep in the playoffs continue to be some combo of the Dodgers, Yankees, Mets. Then you can start to make the argument that, spending isn't just a component, spending is the thing. And that's when the smaller tier teams might have the ability to kind of come together and see, look, we fundamentally cannot do what they do. We cannot defer money the way the Dodgers do. We can, almost every team, I'll say most teams, I haven't looked in a while, most teams have deferred some money somewhere. The Cubs had deferred some money off of a Jason Hayward signing bonus that they're still paying on for another couple of years. But those deferrals are separate and apart from the competitive balance tax threshold, which is what I care about when you look at what a team is going to spend to win for that season. That's the number that matters. The other stuff is really just, can the owner take on that debt obligation and effectively be able to pay it back? And that's why baseball has those calculations for net present value. They have rules that, the Dodgers currently have about $1.3 billion deferred on guys in their current roster. It's Shohei and it's Mookie Betts, and Freeman has a little bit, and they deferred most of Tommy Edmonds' money, and Tanner Scott just deferred $20 million. And it's all these things, but the Dodgers are required every year. Well, they're required to have escrow accounts for each of those deferred payments, and they're required to make a payment to that every year. Now it's in interest. I'm sure it's an investment account, not just an interest-bearing account, but it's in an escrow account that is going to grow over time. So the working theory is deferring money should be okay. That money is going to be there. But you have to be able to have the operating budget to be able to make those payments. You have to be able to maintain those over time so that the money's there for the player in the back end. And we'll see. I could see it going a lot of different directions. I think the deferrals will always stay in the game. Now, the way the Dodgers use them has taken it to another level. I think that's probably going to continue. We'll see where it goes. I do wish the Cubs would spend more, but again, I'll get worked up about what the Cubs spend when I know what they've spent. Right now, the Cubs typically spend, in as much as I say this over and over again, I don't think Jed and Tom lie. I think Tom and Jed largely tell the truth within the framework of what they're trying to sell the fans on. Jed talks about, I would in that scenario make that big contract offer. Okay, but at some point, to really, really believe it, we have to see it. Tom has shown that he will push over the CBT. So he's shown me enough in that regard. It seems like I bring it up every episode, but 2016 to 2020, the Cubs were top 5 in payroll for those 5 years, and the 1 year they weren't, they were 9th. So they were running up some big payrolls. They were up towards the top of the league. And the other big disconnect for me is I look at the size of the media market and all that, and the Cubs are hovering around typically top 10, top 8. Maybe they get up to 6 or 7 on payroll, but the Cubs have like a top 3 most expensive fan experience in the game. And I get the business side. I get Tom wants to make money. I get they need to at least break even, blah, 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 blah. Fans are putting out. The fans are doing their part. And the only times it really annoys me is when Tom gets out and talks like he did this week and just sort of forgets and doesn't acknowledge the fact that the fans are doing their part. The fans are putting in more of a relative effort compared to other teams than he is. And so, we're doing our part. We're buying the tickets. We're buying the merch. I talk occasionally about the idea of boycotts. People say, well, nothing's going to change until you stop going to Wrigley Field and you stop buying merchandise and you stop paying attention to the Cubs and watch them on TV. Why would I do that to myself? Life's too short. Cubs baseball is one of my great loves. Otherwise, I certainly wouldn't be doing a podcast like this. So I'm not going to take that away from myself because I don't like the owner. I fully respect and understand people who do. It's too big a part of my life. I'm not going to do it. And the reality is that somebody else is just going to buy that seat anyway. Somebody else is going to buy that shirt, whatever. But before I wrap this up, more to go. We got 2 weeks until pitchers and catchers report. The Cubs hopefully have some more moves. They still got to get some more in that bullpen. We can start to look at what the Cubs have done. I do think they have made their team better. I do think they are right now division favorites. They are not to the level that I wanted them to get this offseason. They are not prohibitive favorites in the Central. They are not going to be close in terms of projections with the Dodgers, probably not the Mets. Not quite sure how far they'll be behind the Braves and the Phillies and the Padres, and Giants got better this offseason too. Right now there's a lot of power in the National League. So the Cubs, being a top 10 team in baseball, could put them 7th in the National League. It's not going to be an easy road this year in the National League, so we'll do it. But I also want to take a couple minutes and reflect on episode 100. And I started this, called it my dad's episode of this podcast. I was at a point in time, 2022, where I was burnt out at work. My mom had died the spring before. My dad was sick and about to go. And I was looking for, I've always loved podcasts. I love this medium. I love this way of getting out and establishing a relationship with somebody who's speaking to me on a topic I'm interested in, or they're telling a story I want to hear, or they've got a show that I find entertaining. And I thought that was something I wanted to be a part of. So I took some time off from my job and I kind of played around with what to do. And this podcast idea came to me, and it was a chance I have some other podcast ideas in some other spaces, not sports related, not Cubs related, but those require more research, and I'm working on that and all that. But I had never done audio production. I'd never done video production. I made a couple TV appearances over the years back when I was still a journalist. So I kind of done that on the participation side of it, but I'd never run a show. I'd never certainly solo hosted anything. And I always wondered kind of if I could do it. And I don't know. I didn't have any grand plans when I started this. I figured it would just go and run whatever course it would run. And the idea that it would go 100 episodes is just kind of crazy. And I really, really, really appreciate all of you who've been along for the ride. I know from interactions on social media, some of you have been with me from the start, and I really, really appreciate it. We've grown over time. So if you're somebody who came on the last 5 episodes, I'm just as thankful for you. It's given me an outlet. It was really cool to be able to interact with people at CubsCon, not in the sense that I'm some great celebrity, because I'm just a dude with a microphone that has some time. But the idea that we make these connections, and I can get out here and I can give my thoughts. Somebody else can come back at me on Twitter or leave a comment on the podcast. All the stuff. Like I want to know what you think. I want to know where you think I'm right, where you think I'm wrong. But and this is something I was coming around to last week when I was talking to Alex Cohen. When you have certainly a broadcaster, if we're going to watch 162 games for the Cubs, probably 150 of them are going to be on marquee. And that means you're bringing those announcers into your living room, into your headphones, into your car, into wherever it is you listen to the Cubs. You're bringing those people in to talk to you about the Cubs 150 times. That's a relationship. That's a connection. And I think this is something that I think it's important to me. I love baseball. I love the game. I love the Cubs. I love to bond over the game. And I love that I can put something out there that anybody else finds even vaguely entertaining. Maybe you find it maddening, and maybe I've got some people on here that are hate listening to me, and I kind of like that just as much. But I love that you're here. I love that I continue to have this outlet. It's really been good for me. We're really at the point of the off season where I'm so tired of the business side. I need to see play on the field, but that's where we are. But I want to thank everybody for getting me to 100. There's going to be some rebranding coming. I'm going to talk more about it next week, but as all these shows are coming under the Bleacher Bunch, we're trying to give you more content, more fan driven content about this team that we all love so much. And I'm going to rebrand my logo. I'm going to have a look I'm going to keep this mic flag. I still like this logo. I still think it's pretty clean. Doesn't work as well on merch or on social media quite as well, but I'm going to kind of model it after my neon sign in the back. Got a working version with a little help from Infield Fly Girl, who really helped take the concept I was working on and kind of kick it up a notch. So it's going to be a little bit of rebranding. I have a new logo. We're going to converge the Patreon to just the Bleacher Bunch. We're all going to come together in one place to support all the shows. So I know some of you have supported the Sunranto show and are also supporters of mine. So I want to thank you so much. Maybe lighten your load a little bit. You can go support in one place. But I'm thankful for this audience. I'm thankful for the ability to get on a mic. It doesn't always feel that way, but I am very thankful for the Cubs. And this lifelong love I've had since I was 7 or 8 years old. And I hope it never dies. Thank you for joining me today. If you like this episode, please drop a rating and review wherever it is you get your podcasts, and share the episode with a friend. Just a few seconds from you gives me great feedback and helps other Cub fans find the show. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus. And check out the Patreon page at either Bleacher Bunch or CubsPS Plus to help support the show. As always, the theme music for this podcast is Prospect Park West by Jerry McCoy. This is Mike Waller, host of the CubsPS Plus podcast. Every day with Cubs baseball or talking about Cubs baseball is a great day. Go Cubs!